Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my experience with a Moroccan driving test. Now, as I said, this is just purely my experience. I can't say that everyone has the same experience. This is just a man in his 60s in another country who sadly, and I do say sadly, doesn't speak Darija, is making every effort to try and speak it, but not fluent enough that I'm able to do an exam in it, and definitely not fluent enough that I'm able to read it in Arabic. So, as I said in part 1, I failed and was really quite disappointed. But one of the other observations that I noticed there was that the questions in the exam really didn't tally up to what I'd been learning in the school. Because back in the school, I did feel that perhaps the questions were somewhat really quite outdated, and I noticed some of the cars were from my era. There were lots of things like, questions with ABS and stuff like that, cruise control, lane recognition, blind spot recognition, a lot of modern things to do with hybrids that were just not there in the theory that I was learning in the classroom. But when I went to my exam, I was rather surprised that the questions being asked were really quite different to what I'd been learning. So I found that there was quite a time gap between the course that was being offered and actually the more modern version of what the exam was expecting, and rightfully so, of their candidates to achieve. Now, I do believe that this system was upgraded only a couple of years ago to this new modern technology, which again, I truly welcome, because obviously now we know a lot of cars are becoming hybrids. We know a lot of people are using lane assist and, adaptive cruise control and blind spot recognition, and the list goes on and on and on. So I do believe that these things do need to be incorporated into the test. However, they haven't quite reached the classrooms, at least not the classrooms locally where I am. Again, I can't speak for the cities. Just an observation, not a criticism. So now I realise that the actual exam was a lot more intricate and up to date than I first thought and anticipated and had even studied. So I went back thinking, what do I do? So I started looking at the Arabic and thinking, well, wait a minute here. There's a chap called Khalid on YouTube who does the course in Moroccan Arabic. And he's really bang on the money. He's really up to date with the latest questions. Again, if anyone wants to know, I'm more than happy to put in the details and where you can actually come across this. Now, I'm sure all the Moroccans will laugh and say, yeah, we know all about this chat. We watch him all the time. That's how we do our exam. But for an English person, I thought, well, there's no way am I going to try and do it in Moroccan and with Arabic script. It's not going to happen. But I realised that if I wanted to have any idea of the questions actually going to be presented and asked in my exam, I had no choice. So out came the app again. Out came the selection of Arabic. And yes, I did try other apps before anyone asked. I did try apps. They do offer apps in Darija, but unfortunately, they just didn't seem to work. And some of them that you had to pay for, I did try to subscribe to them and pay for them. They still really were struggling. Again, I'm not sure if it's the technical questions that it was actually struggling to translate. I'm not sure. However, I went back to my original free app and painstakingly, and I mean painstakingly, had to go through all the questions again. Again, as I say, there were 40 modules, 20 to 40 questions in the modules. So an awful lot to get through, and I had 15 days. So panicking I was. I hardly slept. I would sit at this computer, try and work out the words, put my phone right next to the speaker, keep rewinding. And of course, this Khalid is really, really informative, because not only does he talk to you about the highway code, not only does he present the questions that could potentially be asked, but he explains to you about certain technical things like, the rules that they have here in Morocco. We are told are the same as French. They're not the same as French. I have looked at the French. They are somewhat similar. I would say at least 90% the same, but there are those differences between the French system and the Moroccan system. So he tends to go through the rules and requirements. Even certain questions have to do with the law, how many points you'll get if you're speeding, if you don't have your seatbelt on, what happens if you're caught with your phone, is it a misdemeanor? All these types of terminologies that I'm not really familiar with back in the UK, I had to learn. So he's very informative. He tells you a lot about the rules and the regulations, as I say. But my app just really wasn't able to really benefit from the information that he was supplying. Now, my poor wife, of course, I was dragging her in, and although her English is almost probably as good as mine, she was still really struggling to, translate the amount of information that was being presented. And I couldn't expect her to sit by my computer day in and day out for the next 2 weeks whilst I tried to crack this Moroccan highway code. Anyway, the days went by, and my good friend Ashraf, my translator, would be very helpful. We'd meet up for a coffee somewhere, and we'd run through some of the complicated questions, and certain questions that I learnt in French that I really wasn't really quite happy with. I said that it doesn't really add up to what I've been taught in England. The Arabic actually did. It seemed that they were much more updated, and certain things that had been arbitrated in previous things were now introduced into the Arabic system, if that makes any sense. So I had to forget all the French information that I had been given in the classroom and really focus very much so on the Arabic side. Now, people are probably sitting there thinking, well, did you actually need a driving school? That would be a very good question. I mean, if someone was to ask, I do feel there was some benefit to go to the classroom, very much so. But of course, for the locals, there's no way they're going to do it without that classroom. But they're going to struggle if they do it in the French system that I was using, because that's exactly the same as they're using. That I would imagine when it comes to the test, they're going to find that there's an awful lot of questions there that they've not seen in the classroom. So again, I'm only speaking locally in my classrooms around here. Maybe that's not the case in the major cities. So I do feel the classroom had its benefits in certain ways. And I do feel it's somewhat sad that when you actually go for the exam, and unfortunately you can't find it in certain languages, like very commonly spoken languages in the world, like Spanish perhaps, or English. You just don't have an option there. There is no option to select. It's French or Darija. Now, I'm sure in the near future that probably will be changing, especially seeing that a lot of the English-speaking countries, I do believe, are the countries themselves that are actually penalised in terms of actually being able to exchange their driving licence directly for a Moroccan one. Certain countries, like I do believe America, Australia, New Zealand. Now, if you're going to say, because they drive on the wrong side of the road, no, us English, we drive on the correct side of the road. Just joking. It's not that, because there are certain other countries that actually drive on the same side as Morocco that also can't exchange their driving licence. So it's not just people who drive on the left side of the road or have the steering wheel on the right side of the car. So back to the day. I go down to the test centre, accompanied by my lovely wife and my translator. A little bit more aware of what will happen in the test centre. But again, very nervous, because now I can only rely on the pictures that I see in the exam and along with what my translator is telling me. What I see visually in terms of writing is no good to me, because I can't read Arabic. So you've got to rely purely on memory. And when you get my age, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what I've been reading 2 or 3 days ago. Your brain just doesn't work the same. So I was aware that I had this disadvantage, and I thought, here we go. This is the last chance I have of driving, at least on this planet. And off we went. Translator was a little bit, I think, personally a bit more comfortable of translating his own language into English than French, because he's having to do French then back into English, and of course French is not his first language, although he speaks perfect French, excellent French. But I think he felt a little bit more relaxed because we knew each other a bit better, and now it was in Darija, his own dialect. So he started asking me the questions. I was aware of a lot more of the technicalities that could be asked in terms of the highway codes questions, and I set about these questions, also aware that I must wait for the little green light to come on before I select my options. So my 40 questions were asked. You then approach the desk. It's pretty quick, pretty straightforward, and lo and behold, you're given your results. The good thing with Morocco, you don't have to wait, like in England, months to have a driving test. You get it pretty quick. The other thing is, which I wasn't aware of at that time, is that your actual practical driving test is the very next day. So I stood waiting nervously for my results, and luckily I got 34 out of 40, so I passed. I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely so excited inside. I couldn't believe it. I was really quite emotional, to say the least. I was really, really happy and surprised. People were lovely. I mean, you can't fault them. The people, are really nice people. They're very helpful. I mean, of course, they're not wanting you to fail, but there's a standard that you have to achieve. So I quickly went down to my driving instructor, who was aware that I'd been driving for many years, and said to me, right, okay, he said, congratulations, but tomorrow you've got to come in, and I'm not going to be the one taking you for your driving test, your practical driving test. It's going to be others. And unfortunately, what I then discovered was that if you happen to fail your practical, you have to do the theory all over again. And I thought, there is absolutely no way am I going to do this theory test again. No way. And of course, the expense, as I said previously. So the next morning, I turn up at this quite basic. It's quite a shock when you've come from quite a deep examination in the highway code to the practical side. It's a little bit chaotic. You're not quite sure what's going to happen, what's going on. But yeah, that is quite simple. You basically have to go up and reverse down a curb all the way along a curb without, of course, hitting the curb or going up on the curb or coming too far away from the curb. You've got these posts on the other side that if you were to touch them, it's an instant fail. You've then got to do parallel parking, and then you've got to do quite a tight right turn parking, a few bits and pieces. Again, you're not told how successful you've been or if you failed or not. And then you actually have to wait for everybody who's taking their test that day to complete their test. You're just given a piece of paper. It doesn't really say a lot. It means you're just going to go on to the next part of the driving test. So you're not really aware of what's going to happen. So everybody finished their driving test around these obstacles. Yeah, it wasn't a nice tarmac surface, I have to say. It did have quite a few potholes, which made it quite interesting. So again, as I say, you're not aware whether you've passed or not. So now you go out for your practical on the road, and everyone gets in the car with you. Now, I was the only English-speaking person in there. So there's 5 of you, but 4 of you learning to drive plus the instructor. So you 3 of you in the back, you buckle up. The driving instructor sits in the passenger seat, and of course the first candidate goes out for a drive, and he then discovers whether at the end of his drive whether he passed or failed. The drive isn't particularly huge, and it's not particularly difficult, but for a lot of youngsters who can't afford many actual practical lessons, I'd imagine that's very, very daunting. Now, I have to say, and I don't say it in an arrogant sense or a cocky sense, but I was quite confident with my driving. Don't forget, I had driven in Morocco for quite some considerable time, so I was aware of how they drive here and the methods of driving here and everything else. So my turn came, all the candidates are in the back, and off I went driving. And I don't want to say it arrogantly or cockily, but I've been driving so many years in England, and thankfully I've only ever had 1 car accident, and that wasn't my fault. So I've had multiple cars, always been a big car enthusiast. My very first car was a Jag, love big cars. So now I thought, right, I'm in my element, and the driving instructor was quiet. And when I pulled up, his few broken words, he said, "Well done, you have driven obviously lots in England." So I said yes, shukran, merci beaucoup, and was given another piece of paper to discover that was all that I required, and I had finally passed my Moroccan driving test. So then what happens is you go and submit this document that you have, and then you have to wait, and I'm still waiting for my plastic driving license to come through, but I do have this card that if I was to be stopped by the police, I present it and I'm allowed to drive. Now, another piece of information that's very important to know is that, first of all, if you wear glasses, as you can see I do, when you go to apply for your driving test, if you're one of those people who sometimes wear glasses and sometimes wear contact lenses, do not make your application with contact lenses in. Go down with glasses. And why? Because they will ask you for a photograph, a passport size photograph of you that will accompany your application for your driving license if you pass. Now, there's a special code put on your driving license that indicates that you wear glasses. So if you happen to be out and you've got contact lenses in, I'm not quite sure how that will work. You can possibly show them, I would have thought, your driving license with a code on the back that indicates you wear glasses, and you can say and show perhaps you've got contact lenses in. But if you fail to have your glasses on and your license comes back to you, it will be missing an essential code which indicates that you wear glasses, and that effectively could cause you a problem if you're stopped by the police and you've got glasses on, because your code is not there. They will ask you, why do you wear glasses? Oh, because I've got bad eyesight, of course, but because you failed to notify them of that, you could be fined for that, and I do believe you could be in problems with your insurance as well. So bear that in mind. That it's really important that you happen to have your glasses on at the time of taking your photograph, and you keep them on all the time when you're learning to drive. Now, as I say, you might have to ask if you're one of those people who likes to swap between glasses and contact lenses. Me, myself, I don't wear contact lenses, so it's not a problem for me. And the other thing to bear in mind is you are only allowed to drive 90 kilometers for 2 years after passing your driving test. So you cannot exceed, and that's actually one of the questions you might find in your test. Trick question, you'll be on a road and you say you've just passed your driving test 6 months ago. What's the maximum speed you can drive on this road? And you might say, oh, 120 kilometers because it's, a motorway or whatever. And you failed because you're only allowed to drive at the maximum speed of 90. So for 2 years, I'm restricted to 90 kilometers per hour. And you have to have a sticker on the back of your car to show that you are restricted to 90 kilometers an hour. Again, it is an offence in Morocco if you've passed your driving test here and you do not have a sticker on the back of your car saying that you can only drive at 90 kilometers an hour. So again, as soon as you pass your test, if you're going to go straight into your car, which you're allowed to do, get that sticker and put it straight inside the car to display your 90 kilometers. So yeah, that feels really strange, because before I was able to drive motorway speeds here in Morocco. Now, naughty boys only allowed to drive 90. So that really, in a nutshell, is my experience here, learning to drive in Morocco. People here will make a lot of effort to try and help you. People here will make a lot of effort to support you. But the government have strickened up, and very rightfully so, and I'm very grateful they strickened up on the system, because there are, and have been in the past, an awful lot of car accidents here. And that's because people's driving standards were really perhaps not on par as what they should be. So the government here, to keep people safe, to keep public safe, to keep drivers safe, they have introduced a more stricter, stringent driving test. And I imagine very soon that might even reflect over to the practical side. They are aware, because they did see my driving license from UK, they are aware that I have been driving some considerable years. Now, again, it's something worth checking. It's not something I can say is factual, but one of the things I do believe that if you are a Moroccan, you are expected to do so many mandatory hours. I think you have a little book which is signed for. You are expected to do so many mandatory hours before you can actually take your test. So a little bit like England, really. But I think with people who have held a driving license for a certain period of time from overseas, they are exempt, from my understanding, of having to do those hours. But again, you need to check on that. I can't say that is concrete. So you may be able to waiver some of those hours, but the driving instructor will explain all that to you. So yeah, that's my experience here in Morocco, in this beautiful country. And so do bear in mind that when you come to Morocco, if you do apply for residency and you wish to continue driving, you will need to either exchange your driving license or you will need to take a Moroccan driving test. Now, as I say, Ashraf, this gentleman that I was using, he is an official government interpreter. And without him, I have no doubt I wouldn't have been able to pass this theory. And this gentleman is a very kind gentleman. He's even prepared, obviously, for a slight fee to travel further afield. There aren't many translators you will discover that are happy and prepared to come and translate, because even though you might find a fantastic translator, and the Moroccans are very educated and they're brilliant with languages, you might not necessarily find one who knows the technicalities and the technical jargon that's actually used in the highway code. So, they might be great at making, translating conversations or literature or whatever, but when it comes to technical things like the highway code, you might need someone who's a little bit more specialized, and Ashraf is. So if any of you are interested, I'm more than happy to give his details, and you can willingly contact him. But again, in city centres like Rabat, Casablanca, Marrakesh, and so on and so forth, you may find the system slightly different. I would imagine you're going to find it a lot more modern. You may even start to find the introduction of other languages other than French, Moroccan soon, but you also may be able to find good interpreters. I wish you well if you've got to do a driving test. Do keep watching this channel, because now I've got my driving test, I'm going to introduce my new car to you. And we should be making some videos with the new car. Take care. As-salama.